Sylvan is another archetype that has fallen out of favor for what I feel is little reason. Clearly, the loss of Soul Charge from 3 to 1 early last year hurt the allure of this deck, but the deck is still rather powerful and has a lot of tools to succeed in the current meta. The two reasons that make this the most sense for this lack of Sylvan play is first, it is not an easy deck to play. In fact, I believe it is a deck that requires the most forethought and intelligence to run successfully, for there really is no single dominant target strategy that almost all other decks possess. Sylvan decks are powerful, but one needs to be astute and smart with the plays. Second, most traditional Sylvan decks can really brick pretty hard. Fortunately, this problem is solved through different deck design, limiting it as a detriment. Before beginning, it should be noted that I have logged a significant amount of time playing Sylvan, so this deck, like all my decks, is not theoretical, but honed by my own personal experience. This is important to note because a number of other Sylvan players will probably not agree with some of the choices I make for this deck build, but I made them because I feel they better manage the problems faced by Sylvan decks in the modern meta versus the more traditional builds. Starting off, not surprisingly, I run 3 copies of Hermitree, for it is important as one of your only advantage-producing cards through its excavation effect. It's one of your big heavy hitters, and also being a level 8 monster is important because it opens up your rank 8 plays, including High Protector, which is an important target remover. Hermitree's excavated effect is also nice in setting up future plays, for there are not very many good cards in the game that help you set up the top of your deck, which is a critical need for Sylvans. 3 Sagequoia is also rather standard, for it has an incredibly useful innate special summoning ability that is jokingly easy to trigger, as well as being a level 7, giving it access to rank 7 plays, including probably the best rank 7 in the game, High Arbiter, which only Sylvans can actually use effectively. High Arbiter is basically a slightly better or slightly worse version of Tiramisu, depending on your perspective, due to its ability to commonly clear the opponent's board of any meaningful threats. Sagequoia's excavated effect is nice, but inconsistent in its overall effectiveness because most Sylvan spell and trap cards are rather bad outside of Charity. However, scooping a Charity out of the graveyard is almost always a good thing. Flowerknight, in my opinion, is the most underrated Sylvan monster, for not a lot of traditional builds run him, which confuses me somewhat. 1800 attack point, level 4 with a single excavation effect on its normal summon checks off a lot of positive boxes for Sylvan decks, with attack point and easy excavation, as well as improving consistency. Its excavated effect is nice as well, allowing you to add a Charity, or if you need it, a Mount Sylvannia from the deck to draw later to set up big plays, or set up another Sylvan monster for other combination potential during the current turn. I run 2 copies. Again, I really don't understand why other Sylvan players do not run this monster. Marshalleaf is another underrated monster in my opinion. Leaf has fallen out of favor recently due to the move towards the cannot target, cannot destroy, or pendulum meta. However, this issue only addresses Leaf's excavated effect, which still has its uses against a number of targets, which due to the strategic nature of this deck, can be activated in a more controlled fashion, increasing its effectiveness. Leaf also shines as a means for excavation of 1 to 2 cards, granting a more consistent means of excavating and speeding through the deck. I run 3 copies for the combined purpose of speed as well as the monster destruction, which also gives you outs to things like Vanity's Emptiness. In contrast to Marshalleaf, I'm not a big fan of Koma Shumaro. With the potential to excavate 5 cards, it can be incredibly useful, but the effect is rather slow, being a flip effect. Also, this card can be played around if the opponent knows you're running Sylvans and you set something face down. The excavated effect has questionable usefulness because Sylvans are a big combo lockdown or OTK deck, so destroying like a single pendulum monster in a scale is typically turns out to be rather irrelevant in the grand scheme of things. Concerning actual back row, the major threats to Sylvans now are the Mirror Force variants and the anti-summoning cards like the Solemns or the Grand Horns. The anti-summoning cards will typically be activated to negate any monster summons or effect before Shrumo can be excavated to destroy it, and Sylvans can typically handle Mirror Force variants without Shrumo. I do run 2 copies in my side deck to deal with back row heavy decks like Tellar Knights. Peaskeeper is another nice choice that seems to be underrated by some players. While its normal summon excavation effect is not that useful because it's only a level 1 400 attack point monster, exposing the player to big damage, it can still be meaningful in combination with cards like Princessprout on the top of the deck, or for emergency purposes to increase consistency. Keeper really shines in its excavated effect, allowing for more combination potential through its graveyard summon. Get Lonefire, you can get your plant tuners, or you can get the Sprout monsters. Cherubsprout is a nice as a one-of, but gets a little dicey beyond the single copy. The advantage of Sprout is that the ability to special summon from the deck works well with both Glow-Up Bulb and Spore, or getting another Princessprout for an XZ play. However, the disadvantage of Cherubsprout is that its ability to excavate only occurs when special summoned, makes it a rather throwaway card in hand. If you draw Cherubsprout, you better hope you have something that could discard it, or add a benefit, or return it to the deck. Princessprout is great when you know it's on the top of your deck and you have a means to excavate it, because it can significantly increase your rank 7, rank 8 play potential. However, outside of this circumstance, its usefulness is questionable. Its tribute effect offers an emergency excavation ability. I run 2 copies because running only 1 seems somewhat worthless, and running 3 is definitely too many. Alsei the High Protector is definitely a nice card, providing a nice variety of free draw when needed, or a targeted non-destruction deck balance which can interfere with the opponent's next turn. Note that a fair amount of the time you can net both. I run 1 copy because there are some other nice rank 8s that typically receive priority over Alsei. Orea the High Arbiter is the best card in the Sylvan arsenal, allowing the potential to clear the opponent's entire board with non-targeted, non-destruction hand return. Orea is largely what allows Sylvans to compete effectively against a lot of pendulum decks, frequently opening the way for large damage potential, if not an outright OTK. Also, Orea can combine nicely with Miracle Fertilizer to produce multiple special summons off a single fertilizer effect. I run 1 copy because without Soul Charge at 3, creating massive Arbiter loops is less valuable than in the past due to too frequent blind excavating. Unfortunately, the TCG lacks Princessprout, which is another high-quality Sylvan XZ that does a lot of things right, especially being a rank 1 XZ monster, for if this card had been any other rank, its usefulness would have been rather restrictive. Also nice is it can activate both of its effects once during the same turn, not just one or the other. When the TCG gets Princessprout, whenever that happens, although it seems a long ways off, Sylvans will get instantly better. In some sense, to even be considered a Sylvan deck, one has to run 3 copies of Charity. Charity is the principal driver of combos in a Sylvan deck, and activating 1 can change the entire potential of the game immediately. Mount Sylvannia is another important combination card for the deck, setting up numerous plays as well as potential for dumping tuners or other bad cards from the hand to generate a setup plus. Unfortunately, the problem with Sylvania is that it does not allow you to discard another copy of itself for its effect, which raises the question on whether to run 2 or 3. Because I run Flowerknight and its search ability, I only run 2 copies of Sylvania to limit multiple copies. When moving on to the non-Sylvan monsters, obviously 3 copies of Lonefire Blossom are required for maximizing Hermitree summoning and other playmaking. Note that when making any of your plays with Lonefire, make sure Lonefire goes first, because remember, if you special summon from your deck with Lonefire, you have to shuffle, which will destroy any excavation preparation you set up. Another not surprising choice, I run 1 Spore, 1 Glow-Up Bulb, as I previously alluded to. Again, this choice should be rather self-explanatory. Quality plant tuners opening up synchro plays. I run 1 copy of Copy Plant, for it has a nice flexibility via its level changing effect in that it can become material for almost any rank XZ summon, or it can become it's a tuner for synchro summoning, which alleviates pressure on cards like Miracle Fertilizer. Also, it works very well with Miracle Fertilizer for more flexibility. In addition, it being a natural level 1 makes it a good target for Cherubsprout. Finally, I run 2 copies of Battlefader to prevent OTK. One of the meaningful omissions some might note from the monster lineup is a lack of Rose Lover. In my opinion, Rose Lover is more detrimental to this deck than beneficial, because a vast majority of the time, Lover is being run for the chief purpose of summoning Hermitree, which means if one does not have a Hermitree in hand, Lover has little purpose. Only very rarely will Lover's effect be utilized to summon a Sagequoia. In my experience, Hermitrees are summoned or discarded to the graveyard rather quickly when I play this deck. It further limits the value of Rose Lover. Also, drawing Lover is incredibly bad unless a discard vehicle exists. For the spells, I run my 2 standard spell staples, 1 Raigeki and 1 Soul Charge. I also feel that running 3 copies of Miracle Fertilizer might as well be mandatory for this deck to maximize XZ plays, Hermitree reuse, and Orea combination. Now let's get to the controversial part of this deck, because running Flowerknight should hardly be viewed as controversial. The biggest problem with Sylvan decks are blind excavating and bricking. Interestingly enough, there's a rather useful card that helps neutralize this problem: Card Advance. Card Advance lets you look at the next 5 cards in your deck and place them in any order you want, as well as grants a secondary normal summons when it involves a tribute. The secondary normal summon is okay and can be very useful to have from time to time, but the spell-based Big Eye effect is the real value of this card. Card Advance helps avoid long-term bricking as well as eliminates blind excavating, setting up numerous combination plays for the deck. Some might argue that Card Advance is a bad top deck. This is correct, but if you're top decking with Sylvans, your win probability is already almost 0 against any other competent deck, so it being a bad top deck is rather irrelevant. I run 2 copies because this also takes a lot of pressure off drawing that Sylvan Charity to help you set up as well. Sylvans are plants, right? Right. So why aren't more Sylvan players running Mark of the Rose? Mark is a nasty card for Sylvans due to their OTK probability as well as their innate graveyard summoning tuners. Mark is also rather useful in combination with Card Advance due to its extra tribute-based normal summon. Play Advance, make your normal summons, then use Mark to grab your opponent's monster, then use Advance's Tribute effect to tribute both monsters for Hermitree, use Hermitree's effect to almost guarantee a draw because of Advance's card preparation effect, and get another positive from the excavation. 2 copies of Mark work very nicely for me for what it can do in this deck. Closing out the spells, I run 1 copy of One Day of Peace. For again, when a card like Charity or Advance is not available, Sylvans have to resort to blind excavation, which can be dicey. 1 day buys you 2 more cards, the drawn card and the next draw phase, and a greater capacity to set up plays for a turn without fear of losing via some form of OTK, as well as this card being a great late game card. Some might notice the lack of both 1-for-1 and Twin Twister. The problem with both of these cards is Sylvans is not a deck that really likes to discard unless it's through something like Mount Sylvannia's effect, which sets up their combos. So both of these cards have their moments. They can be very inconsistent, much more so in this deck than other builds. For the traps, I run only 1 copy of Vanity's Emptiness. It is noteworthy that I side 3 copies of Trap Stun when I go up against more back row heavy decks. If someone doesn't like the trap stuns, you can always throw in that old chestnut Mystic Space Typhoon, but I like using the stuns because typically I'm going up against a lot of back row and I don't have to pick and choose. For the remaining extra deck, I run a combination of Synchro and XZ monsters, 1 Hot Red Dragon Archfiend Abyss, 1 Scarlight Red Dragon Archfiend, 1 Ancient Pixie Dragon. It's another way to go into Abyss with a level 2 Spore, and it gives you draw power and free destruction when comboed with Mount Sylvannia. 1 copy of Hi-Speedroid Chanbara, 1 number 95 Galazy-Eyes Dark Matter Dragon, 1 number 107 Galazy-Eyes Tachyon Dragon, 2 Divine Dragon Knight Felgrands, 1 Red Eyes Flare Metal Dragon, 1 number 11 Big Eye, and 1 Phantom Beast Draco Sack. However, I would take out the Draco Sack for 1 number 38 Hope Harbinger Dragon Titanic Galaxy when it comes out. Finally, for the rank 1 monsters, I run 1 copy of Slacker Magician and 1 copy of Ghost Trick Dullahan. I like playing Sylvans a lot, for while it can be a frustrating deck from time to time, it's also a fun deck, because when you play it properly, there's actually a sense of accomplishment rather than the paint-by-numbers rote plays associated with a number of other decks like Monarchs or Mermails, which takes no creativity, no forethought, just the same play over and over and over again every duel. Overall, I would like to see Sylvan get 1 more monster, a level 1 with the once per turn setup effect, something like if you removed a Sylvan monster in your graveyard from play, you could look at the top 2 cards of your deck and put them back in any order. Well, that's my Sylvan deck. Thank you for your attention and your time. I'm out.